You were never meant to hear this. August 14th, 1864. A storm rolled over the hills of New Haven, blackening the skies at noon. Thunder cracked like gunfire, and inside a wooden house just outside the town's edge, a child was born, but not like you'd imagine. He didn't cry. He didn't move. And when the midwife reached for a pulse, there was none. Dead on arrival, they said. Another tragic stillbirth. They wrapped him in cloth and left him in a cedar cradle to grieve. But by morning, something had changed. The cloth was soaked, the room was ice cold, and the child's eyes were open. But still, no heartbeat. No one could explain it. Not the midwife, not the town doctor, not the bishop called in to offer last rites. The baby lived, ate, slept, moved. But his chest never rose, his skin stayed pale, and if you pressed your ear against him, you'd hear nothing. He was baptized Tobias Hale, and they called him a miracle. But miracles are not supposed to be this cold. Whispers began quickly. People said his birth had brought the storm, that the livestock had gone silent the moment he opened his eyes, that 2 crows had sat on the windowsill of the Hale house for 3 nights straight and never blinked. His mother refused to speak for a month. His father boarded up the windows, and when a traveling physician from Boston arrived to examine him, he was found days later wandering in the woods, muttering that his skin was made of silence. You think this is just a creepy story? You're wrong. Because records confirm it. Tobias Hale existed. The 1864 census lists him. He lived, grew, attended school, a boy with no heartbeat, no warmth, and no shadow, who was somehow never ill, never aged normally, and never bled. The local parish banned his entry. Teachers claimed he could read books he'd never touched, and one minister who dared call him a trick of Satan died of a brain hemorrhage during service. But this is just the surface. You've just opened a door, and what's behind it wasn't meant for public eyes. You want truth? Then keep listening. But know this, the deeper we go, the less of your old self will remain. They say every town has a story that the elders tell in hushed voices, a story they pass down, not to entertain, but to warn. For New Haven, that story was Tobias Hale. By the time he was 5, there was no denying he was different. The other children ran, shouted, bruised their knees. Tobias walked with an unsettling stillness, like someone moving through a dream they didn't want to wake from. His skin was cold to the touch, always, even in summer, even under the midday sun. And there was something else. Dogs would not go near him, not even strays desperate for food. They would snarl, back away, and watch from a distance, tails low, ears flat, as though they were looking at something ancient wearing the face of a boy. It was his teacher, Mrs. Whitford, who first noticed the thing no one wanted to talk about. Tobias never blinked unless someone looked directly at him. It was as though he was always watching, always knowing, and yet pretending not to. The townsfolk tried to explain it away. Poor boy, weak heart, they said. But there was no heart to be weak. The traveling doctor who examined him in 1869 left town after a single night, abandoning his wagon and tools. They found him 2 counties over, refusing to speak. Except for one thing he kept repeating, he looked right through me. By age 9, Tobias had developed a strange habit. He would write names on scraps of paper and bury them in the ground behind the Hale house. No one knew whose names they were, until the people in town began dying in the order he buried them. Coincidence, they said, until the church bell rang for Samuel Pratt, the sheriff's brother, before anyone in the town even knew he was dead. But here's the part that historians avoid, the part that never makes it into the archives. Tobias Hale's existence didn't just confuse doctors, it disturbed men in power. Records show that in late 1870, a group of strangers arrived in New Haven, men in dark coats who spoke little and took no rooms at the inn. They visited the Hale family one night. By morning, they were gone. No one saw them leave, no one saw them arrive. But the next day, Tobias was nowhere to be found. And yet, his shadow never left the town. They thought he was gone. The Hale family locked their doors. The whispers faded. People forced themselves to believe the boy had been taken far away, maybe to some medical facility, maybe to a grave they would never be told about. But less than a month later, Tobias returned. No one saw him arrive. No one heard a wagon or footsteps. Yet one morning, there he was, standing in the center of the marketplace, barefoot, holding a silver pocket watch that didn't belong to him. And when the town clock struck noon, every single one of those market clocks, the ones in shops, in windows, in men's waistcoats, stopped. Dead silence. No ticking, no chimes, for exactly 7 minutes. Then, all at once, they began again. From that day forward, the townsfolk stopped calling him a miracle. They started calling him an omen. Here's what they didn't know. The men who took him weren't doctors. They weren't government officials either, at least not the kind that showed up on records. The only written trace of their existence lies in a single fragment found in the New Haven Parish archives, a letter addressed to the Reverend Gideon Marsh. It reads, "The subject displays no cardiovascular function, yet sustains motility and cognition indefinitely. Possible connection to Project Lazarus. Extraction incomplete. Observed from distance. Re-engagement planned." No one knows what Project Lazarus was. It's not in any medical journals, not in military files, not in any public record. But what I can tell you is this. Every time that phrase appears in history, it's attached to the unexplained. The elderly still speak of the days after Tobias returned. Chickens laid black eggs. Milk spoiled within minutes of milking. And a family that lived next to the Hales woke one morning to find all their mirrors turned to face the wall. When questioned, Tobias said something no child should have said. They didn't teach me to live. They taught me to wait. Wait. For what? No one asked. Or maybe they did. And they didn't like the answer. But from that moment, the boy who had no pulse became something else entirely. And whether you believe it or not, his story was no longer just about him. It was about them. They tried to break him. Not with chains, not with cages, with order. The men who took Tobias didn't return for him in the open. They didn't need to. Their influence bled into New Haven like ink into water. New rules were passed. New health inspections were announced. And though no one said his name, every policy seemed designed for one purpose: to control Tobias Hale. They told the Hale family he needed routine examinations at the parish infirmary. But the infirmary wasn't run by doctors. It was run by men who carried no medical instruments, only ledgers. Every examination began with questions, not about his health, but about his thoughts. When you close your eyes, what do you see? Do you dream in color or in symbols? When did you first realize you were not like them? They fed him in patterns, the same food, at the same time, every day. They made him walk in measured steps, sit for hours, staring at a blank wall, speak only when spoken to. They thought repetition could rewire him, make him predictable. It didn't work. The notes they kept, the few that survived, read like the study of something inhuman. One entry, dated October 3rd, 1870, says, "Subject does not sleep. Subject only pretends. At irregular intervals, eyes move rapidly beneath lids, as if watching something unseen. Heart remains absent. Skin temperature constant, 42 degrees Fahrenheit. No signs of decay." By winter, they escalated. They began isolating him from the outside world entirely, cutting off contact with his parents, his school, even sunlight. They believed sensory deprivation would weaken him. Instead, it strengthened him. The few who saw him during this period swore he began knowing things, private things. A woman claimed Tobias described in detail a conversation she'd had with her husband 3 days earlier, in a locked room 30 miles away. The control systems were failing, and the men knew it. One night, the lead examiner, a man named Dr. Whitcomb, burst into the town tavern pale as snow, muttering the same phrase over and over: "He's not learning from us. He's remembering." The next morning, Dr. Whitcomb was gone. His office was burned to the ground, and Tobias was back in the marketplace, barefoot again, staring at that same silver pocket watch. The man who asked was no priest, no doctor, no authority. He was a drunk. Jonas Reddick, a fisherman whose life had been stripped bare by the war, had nothing left to fear and nothing left to lose. One late evening, after too many swallows of rye, he spotted Tobias standing alone at the edge of the frozen river. The boy was still, watching the water, not shivering, not breathing steam. Jonas stumbled toward him, boots crunching on snow. "They say you don't remember being born," he slurred. Tobias didn't answer, so Jonas tried again. "What is it you do remember, boy?" Tobias turned to him slowly, and then he smiled. But it wasn't a child's smile. It was old, heavy, like it had been carved into his face centuries ago. "The rooms between worlds," Tobias said. "The places you go when your body thinks it's gone." Jonas laughed. "You mean dreams?" Tobias shook his head. "Dreams fade. These don't. In the rooms there's no time, no air. Just the sound of people knocking from the other side." Jonas swore the boy's eyes darkened when he said it, not like pupils widening, but like something was pulling the light out from behind them. The drunk fisherman told everyone at the tavern that night. They laughed at first, but the laughter didn't last, because over the next week 3 different townsfolk reported hearing knocks in their homes, 3 sharp raps, with no one at the door. Then the livestock started acting strange again. Cows stood facing the same direction for hours. Chickens refused to roost, and the river stopped freezing. The parish warned people not to speak to Tobias, claiming he was a vessel for dangerous ideas, but the fear had already spread because what Tobias had said rang truer than anyone wanted to admit. He wasn't learning from life. He was remembering from somewhere else. Jonas Reddick disappeared 2 weeks later, the last sighting of his, and was at the river's edge, staring at the water in the same way Tobias had that night. No body was ever found. And that winter marked the beginning of what old records call the season of hollow faces, when over a dozen people in New Haven claimed they woke to find Tobias standing in their rooms, watching. They were not random. The people who claimed to wake and find Tobias standing silently at their bedside, they all shared something. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't status, it wasn't even belief, it was memory. Each one of them, when pressed, admitted to having a recurring dream. Not the same dream, not exactly, but the same place, a corridor of black stone, damp air, and at the far end, a door they could never open. Some dreamed it once a year, some every week. But after Tobias appeared in their rooms, the dream changed. The door was no longer closed, it was open, and something inside was waiting. Parish leaders told the town it was a mass hysteria, an infection of the mind caused by gossip. But there's a document buried in the Connecticut State Library archives, sealed for over a century, that says otherwise. It's a declassified memo, dated 1837, stamped property of the Office of Esoteric Observation. The file describes an investigation into Subject 43, a young girl in Massachusetts who claimed to visit door rooms in her sleep. The details are nearly identical to the dreams in New Haven. The black corridor, the damp air, the door that was always locked. Until it wasn't. The final line of the memo is underlined twice in red ink. When the door opens, the visitor does not return alone. No one in New Haven knew of this memo. No one knew the government had already encountered something like Tobias before, and no one knew how that earlier case ended, because the file cuts off mid-page, the rest torn away. But one thing was certain. Tobias was no longer just a boy with no pulse. He was a key to a place most people only brushed against in dreams. And those he visited began to change. They stopped speaking as much, stopped eating. Their eyes would drift toward corners where nothing stood, and one by one they withdrew from the town, moving into the Hale house despite it already being full. By spring, 15 people lived there, no one knew why. And when questioned, each of them gave the same answer. It's closer here. Closer to what? They didn't say. The man sent to confront him was Sheriff Elias Ward, a veteran of the war, a man who'd faced cannon fire, bayonets, and starvation without flinching. He didn't believe in omens, he didn't believe in curses, and he sure as hell didn't believe in a boy who could undo a town with nothing but his presence. Ward walked into the Hale house on April 2nd, 1871, carrying a revolver and a court order. His goal was simple: remove Tobias and disperse the cult forming under his roof. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed two things. The air was cold, colder than the frost outside, and the ticking of his pocket watch had stopped. Tobias sat at the kitchen table, the silver pocket watch before him, barefoot, pale, and utterly still. The others in the house didn't speak. They didn't even look at Ward. They just stared at the walls, as if something behind them was more interesting. Ward set the revolver down on the table between them. "You're coming with me, boy." Tobias looked up, his expression unreadable. "You brought the wrong kind of weapon." Ward smirked. "I brought the only one I need." But before he could reach for the gun, Tobias spoke again. "You think you're carrying it in your hand, but it's in your head." Ward's grip faltered, his vision blurred, the room seemed to stretch, the walls bending away, and then, just for a second, he saw it. The corridor from the dreams, black stone, damp air, a door at the end slightly open. Ward stumbled back, gasping, the revolver clattering to the floor. His ears were filled with a sound, 3 sharp knocks coming from inside his skull. Tobias pushed the pocket watch toward him. "You can't stop what's already inside you." Ward left the house without another word. He never filed the court order. 3 days later, he resigned his post and boarded a train south. Witnesses claimed he didn't take a single belonging, except for the silver pocket watch. The vacancy in the sheriff's office was never filled. No one wanted the job. And Tobias? He never left the Hale house again. But his reach was just beginning to extend far beyond it. It started in Bridgeport. A woman named Clara Fitch, a seamstress who had never left the city, woke one morning with her hands bleeding. Her husband found her sitting at the edge of their bed, whispering over and over, "The door is open, the door is open." She could not explain the wounds on her palms, only that she had been knocking from the wrong side. 2 days later, a dock worker in New London reported seeing a pale boy standing on the pier at midnight. He swore the child never moved, never breathed, and when the fog rolled in, he was gone. By the time word reached New Haven, there were already 5 more sightings, all from people who had never met Tobias Hale, yet described him perfectly. The Hale house became a quiet epicenter of something vast and invisible. Letters began arriving from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia, strangers asking if the boy was safe, as though they owed him something. None of the senders explained how they knew his name, but all signed their letters with the same phrase, "Closer here." No one outside the circle understood what it meant, but the people who had seen Tobias, they knew. They felt it in their bones. By midsummer, the dreams had spread. Reports of the Black Corridor appeared in newspaper classifieds, always disguised as strange poetry or personal ads. One read, "Met you in the hall again, door still open, light still gone." Authorities dismissed it as eccentricity, but buried in a private ledger of the Office of Esoteric Observation is a note from August 1871. Subject activity is no longer localized, containment compromised, non-exposed individuals now exhibiting the dream structure without contact, recommend silent monitoring only. Direct interference seems to accelerate spread. What spread? Not a disease, not an idea, a place. The boy in the Hale house didn't have to move, whatever he was, wherever he had been in those moments before his first breath. It was reaching outward like roots beneath the soil, and anyone who brushed against it, in dream or waking vision, found the door a little more open the next time. And what waited behind it, even Tobias didn't say. But he was smiling more now. Her name was Mary Kettering, a schoolteacher, 29 years old, never married, known for her strict discipline and habit of walking the same route home every evening. On the night of September 14, 1871, she didn't make it home. The boarding house keeper said Mary had retired early, complaining of a headache. Around midnight, other tenants heard her speaking in her room, low, rhythmic, like she was reciting something. Then silence. At dawn, they found her lying in bed, eyes open, pupils wide, lips slightly parted, as if in mid-sentence. She was warm, her pulse was steady, but she didn't blink, didn't respond, didn't wake. The doctor called it a catatonic state. But one of the tenants swore she saw Mary's fingers moving slowly under the blanket. 3 soft taps. Pause. 3 soft taps. Pause. The coroner's report mentioned something unusual. The pattern of her brain activity was not flat, not diminished, but heightened, as though she were more awake than any living human, just somewhere else. Here's the detail that never made it into the public record. When they tried to move her, Mary's head turned, sharply, impossibly, toward the corner of the room. And though her lips barely moved, a witness swore she whispered, "It's closer here." 2 weeks later, her sister, sorting through Mary's belongings, found a sheet of paper folded inside her Bible. Drawn in careful, deliberate strokes was a corridor of black stone, damp, endless. And at the far end, for the first time in any account, the door was fully open. The inside was pure darkness, no light, no shape. But at the very edge of the threshold, the faint outline of a boy's bare feet. The Hale house received no visitors that month. Tobias did not appear in the marketplace, but on the night of September 29th, 3 separate people, all in different towns, reported dreaming of walking into that same corridor and hearing Mary's voice from inside the darkness. None of them remember what she said next, or maybe they just can't repeat it. The man's name was Andrew Pritchard, a stonecutter who worked the New Haven cemetery. He was the kind of man people described as too stubborn to die, the kind who'd bury others without flinching and then drink whiskey on the tombstone steps. When the dreams came for him, he fought back. The first time he saw the black corridor, the damp air, the door cracked open. But instead of moving forward, Andrew turned away. He told himself it was just a dream, nothing more. The second night, the corridor returned. Only this time the door was behind him, no matter which way he faced. He woke in a cold sweat, cursing, and he swore aloud, "I'll not walk through." The third night, he didn't dream at all, or at least, he didn't remember. But his wife did. She woke to find Andrew sitting upright beside her, eyes open, breathing slow. His lips were moving. She leaned close and heard him whispering, "Closer here, closer here, closer here." The next morning he had no memory of it, but when he went to work at the cemetery, he noticed something chilling. One of the older mausoleums, sealed for over 50 years, now had its iron gate unlocked. Inside, the air was cold, damp, and at the far end, just before the wall, was a shadow the light wouldn't touch. Andrew slammed the gate shut, locked it, and threw the key into the river. But that night the dreams returned. Only now the corridor smelled like wet stone and old flowers, the same smell as that mausoleum. On the 5th night, Andrew didn't wake at all. His wife found him at dawn standing barefoot in the yard, staring east toward the Hale house, and on the bottoms of his feet, mud, as if he'd been walking somewhere he couldn't have reached. He quit his job the next day, sold the house. But it didn't matter. The dreams followed, the door followed, and one morning, Andrew simply didn't come back from sleep. The Hale house gained another resident that week. Tobias never spoke Andrew's name, but those who lived there swore he said one thing the night the stonecutter arrived: "Some men walk, some are carried." It was late October when he finally said it. The Hale house was silent except for the wind pressing against the shutters. Inside, 15 people sat in the parlor. The residents, as the town had started calling them, each with that same hollow, waiting look. Tobias was seated in the high-backed chair by the fire, He wasn't reading, wasn't playing, wasn't moving, just watching the flames. Then he spoke. Not to anyone in particular and not loud, but in a way that made every person in that room lift their head at once. "It's not behind the door," he said. "The door is inside you." The words sank like stones in water. One of the women asked quietly, "What's in there?" Tobias tilted his head. His voice was soft, almost kind. "Everything you've thrown away," he explained. Though explained isn't the right word. His sentences were broken, drifting, as if he was describing something not meant for human language. He spoke of a place without time, where the things you'd buried, memories, fears, moments you'd never dare admit, still lived, waiting. Every grief you'd ignored, every cruelty you'd justified, every part of yourself you thought you'd lost. And when the door opened, those things noticed you. One man asked why some people saw the corridor and others didn't. Tobias smiled faintly. "They knock first," he said. The fire snapped. No one moved. Then Tobias looked around the room, his gaze settling on each face for just a second too long. "Once you open it," he said, "it follows you. Not the place, not me. You." Someone asked how he knew all this. Tobias's answer was simple, almost casual. "Because I was born in it." The room went silent. No one spoke again until morning, and by then 3 of the residents had packed their things and left the Hale house without a word. But they didn't go far. Within a week they were back, not knocking, just walking in, their eyes darker, their smiles quieter, and Tobias? He didn't welcome them, he didn't have to. His name was Reverend Silas Ward. A man of scripture, known for sermons that could make even the most stubborn drunkard sweat with shame. He had heard the rumors of the Hale boy, dismissed them as gossip, until his own daughter began speaking the phrase "closer here" in her sleep. Ward visited the house once, Bible in hand, ready to cast the shadow out. He didn't last 5 minutes inside. No one knows exactly what he saw, but when he left, his hands were shaking so badly he dropped the Bible in the dirt. 3 nights later he returned, not with scripture, but with oil, matches, and a look in his eyes like a man who'd been told his own death date. The residents didn't try to stop him. They just stood at the windows, watching. Ward poured oil along the foundation, muttering prayers through clenched teeth. When the match flared in his hand, the air seemed to shift, heavier, like the pressure before a storm. The flame touched the wall and went out. Not sputtered, not smoked. Went out, as though the wood itself had swallowed it whole. Ward struck another. Same thing. No heat, no smoke, only that feeling in the air growing denser, colder. From the upstairs window, Tobias was watching. Ward shouted up at him. Threats, curses, scripture twisted into something ugly, but Tobias just tilted his head and said, clear enough for everyone to hear, "You can't burn what's already ash." Ward stumbled back, eyes wide. He dropped the matches, clutching his chest. Later his wife said he came home pale and silent, refusing to speak of that night. 2 weeks later, Ward was found sitting in the church at dawn, staring at the altar, alive but unresponsive. In his lap lay his Bible, every page blank. The Hale house remained untouched, not a single scorch mark. After that night, no one in town tried to destroy it again, not because they stopped fearing it, but because then I started understanding that fear was part of it, and the house, like Tobias, knew how to keep what it owned. It was winter when Tobias finally stepped beyond the Hale property. Snow had been falling for 3 days, blanketing the town in a silence so deep you could hear the creak of the ice on the river. He walked alone, no coat, no shoes, no visible breath in the freezing air. Witnesses said he didn't follow the road. He cut straight through yards, gardens, even across frozen ponds without slipping. Wherever he passed, the snow didn't crunch under his feet. It didn't sound at all. By the time he reached the town square, people had gathered at their windows, watching. No one dared open their door. They just waited. Tobias stopped in the center of the square, right by the old well. He stood there for nearly an hour, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Then he reached down, lifted the heavy wooden cover, and peered inside. Those close enough to watch swore the air above the well turned black, not like smoke, but like the absence of light. It rippled, and for a moment, the snow around Tobias melted. That's when they heard it. Not from the well, not from Tobias, from everywhere. A knocking, slow, measured, the same pattern described by Mary Kettering before she vanished. 3 soft taps, pause. 3 soft taps, pause. One man, the butcher's apprentice, shouted from his doorway, "What do you want?" Tobias turned toward him, and in that voice that was neither loud nor quiet said, "I'm not the one who's knocking." Then he dropped the cover back over the well and began walking home. But here's the detail the witnesses argued about for years. Some swore the snow began falling normally again once he left. Others said it never started back up, that in the path he walked, the ground stayed bare until the thaw. That night, in 3 different homes, people woke to find wet footprints in their hallway. Bare feet, small, leading nowhere. The next morning, the butcher's apprentice, the man who'd asked the question, was gone. His bed was warm, his boots were still by the door, but the snow outside had no prints at all. It began with a seamstress named Clara Dow. She'd been one of the few in town unafraid to look Tobias in the eye. Bold woman, stubborn, the kind who could thread a needle in the dark and didn't waste words. One evening she was repairing a torn coat when Tobias appeared at her door. She claimed she didn't invite him in. He simply stepped across the threshold without waiting. He handed her a single strip of black cloth and asked her to stitch it to keep the shape. When she asked what shape, he smiled. "The one you'll need when they come." She sewed it anyway, though she admitted later she had no memory of the hour it took her. She only remembered the sound, 3 slow taps against the inside of her walls. The next morning, Clara found a mark on her left forearm. It wasn't ink or paint, more like a faint burn, the shape of an unblinking eye. No pain, no swelling, just the mark. She scrubbed at it until her skin bled. It stayed. Days later, others began to notice marks of their own. All different shapes, but always somewhere hidden. Inside the wrist, behind the ear, along the ribs. Each mark appeared after an encounter with Tobias. The blacksmith had one like a crescent. The baker's boy bore a spiral. The widow Maeve carried what looked like a handprint. And here's where it turned. Whenever one of these marked people died, illness, accident, or simply disappearing, the mark didn't vanish with them. It reappeared somewhere else in town, on a child's ankle, on the inside of a door frame, on the beam above a fireplace. People tried to burn the marks away. They scarred the wood, they blackened the plaster, but the shape always returned by morning, untouched by ash. One farmer swore he cut the beam out of his barn entirely and threw it into the river. A week later, the same beam was back in place, bone dry, with the mark exactly as it had been. Tobias never explained them, but whenever someone asked, his answer was the same. You can't mark what isn't already chosen. By spring, nearly 1/3 of the town bore them, and once marked, people claimed they began hearing the knocking, not just in dreams, but in walls, in floors, even in their own heartbeat. It was the cellar beneath the abandoned Kettering mill. The building had been empty since Mary Kettering's disappearance, its windows boarded, its wheel rotting in the river. No one in town dared go near it, not because of the memories, but because of the sound. People claimed that if you stood within 20 paces of the mill after dark, you could hear the wheel turning, even though it had been broken for years. One night, Tobias led 6 marked townsfolk there. No one knows if they volunteered or if the marks pulled them. They didn't bring lanterns, yet each said later they could see perfectly in the dark. The cellar door groaned open without Tobias touching it. The air was damp, the smell of river moss heavy, and then they saw it. Every mark, on every person, glowing faintly, not like fire or candlelight, but like something alive under the skin. The walls, too, bore marks. Dozens, hundreds, carved and burned and pressed into the stone. Some matched the ones on their bodies. Others were stranger, shapes no one could name, and they glowed as well. Tobias stood in the center of the cellar and placed his hand on the floor. The glow pulsed, once, twice, then began to spread in lines like veins under stone. The marked townsfolk felt it in their bones, a vibration so low it made their teeth ache. One man tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but his voice didn't leave his mouth. Tobias looked up at them, and in that steady, unnatural calm said, "Every door needs a key. You are not the key." He pointed to the walls. "These are." When someone asked what the marks opened, Tobias only answered, "Not opened. Called." The cellar grew colder. Their breath began to frost in the air, all except Tobias, who stood untouched. Then the knocking started, louder now, echoing from beneath the floor. 3 slow taps. Pause. 3 more. One of the townsfolk fled up too. He stares. They swore they didn't remember leaving the cellar, but they woke the next morning in their own bed with damp earth under their fingernails. The rest stayed until the knocking stopped, and when they left, the marks on their bodies were no longer faint. They were black, permanent. It happened on market day, the one time the whole town gathered in the square. Stalls lined the cobblestone, vendors shouted over each other, and the smell of baked bread and smoke drifted through the cold air. It should have been ordinary, until they saw the mark. The man was Thomas Yarrow, a cooper by trade. His mark, a sharp 4-pointed star, had appeared on his throat months earlier. He'd stopped speaking soon after. People thought it was fear or shame. But that day, he was smiling, not wide, not warm, just smiling in a way that made people step back without knowing why. He was standing at the edge of the fountain when it happened. Witnesses say the sound came first, a hollow thump that rolled through the square, making every chest vibrate. Not the usual 3 taps, just one, loud enough to rattle the glass in the windows. Thomas froze. Then, without moving his feet, his body began to fade. Not vanish all at once. It started with his hands, the skin going translucent, the bones briefly visible, then dissolving like smoke in water. His smile never changed. His eyes never blinked. People screamed. Some ran. Others stood rooted, as if moving would make it worse. The air around him shimmered like heat rising from stone, though the day was cold enough for frost. When the fading reached his chest, the mark on his throat flared, black so deep it seemed to pull the light out of the air. And then, he was gone. No puff of smoke, no body, just gone. But here's the part the witnesses whispered about later. The sound didn't stop. After he vanished, the hollow thump came again, this time from under the fountain. 3 more times. Then silence. When they drained the fountain the next day, the bottom was dry, the stones bare, except for one new thing. In the very center, carved into the stone, was Thomas Yarrow's 4-pointed star, perfect, fresh, as if chiseled that morning. No one ever stepped into that fountain again. But weeks later, a child was found standing in it at dawn, barefoot, eyes closed, with a 4-pointed star burned into the sole of his foot. It began the first year the river froze solid before December. Snow had fallen early, deep and silent, muffling every sound but the creak of shutters in the wind. That's when Tobias started visiting the houses, only the ones with children. He never knocked. He would stand in the doorway until someone noticed him, then point to the child without speaking. The parents, even the most defiant, never stopped him. Some said they couldn't move at all, as if their bodies had turned to stone the moment his shadow crossed the threshold. By the week's end, 11 children had been marked. Each mark was different, but all of them appeared on the skin above the heart. The chosen children grew quieter, less restless. They began waking in the night, standing at their bedroom windows, staring out at the snow as though waiting for something. Then came the night of the procession. No one saw it start. Only that, at the stroke of midnight, every marked child stepped out of their homes barefoot, wearing nothing but a white shift. They didn't speak. They didn't shiver. They simply walked, one by one, through the snow toward the edge of town, where the road met the frozen river. Parents tried to follow. Some couldn't move. Others found their own doors locked from the outside, though no one stood there. And those who did make it into the street said the air felt heavy, like walking through water. And the closer they got to the children, the harder it was to breathe. Tobias walked at the head of the line, bare feet pressing into snow without leaving prints. He carried nothing, yet his hands moved as though holding invisible reins. The children's eyes never left him. When they reached the river, Tobias stepped onto the ice without hesitation, the children behind him. Not one of them slipped. They crossed to the center, where the moon struck the frozen surface, and there they stopped. The watching parents swore the ice beneath the group began to darken, not from melting, but from something rising beneath it, shapes, shadows, moving slowly upward as if answering a call. Then the sound, 3 slow knocks from deep under the river. The children all placed a hand over their marks, and the ice did not break, but it moved. No one from the town admits to following them onto the ice that night. But decades later, in a letter found hidden behind the walls of the Kettering parsonage, there was a confession, unsigned, written in a hand so shaky it tore the paper in places. The writer claimed they had been a boy then, too old to be chosen, but young enough to slip past the adults. They hid behind the blackened husk of the ferry pier and watched Tobias and the children stand in the moonlight. They said the shadows under the ice were not shapes at all, but faces, dozens of them. Eyes open, mouths moving slowly, as if speaking words the watcher could not hear. The ice pulsed under the children's feet, rising and falling like the surface of a sleeping animal. Then, the impossible happened. The ice inhaled. That's the only way the witness could describe it. The air rushed downward, dragging the breath from the boy's lungs, pulling frost and snow toward the black shapes beneath. The moonlight warped, bent into the darkness, and the witness swore the stars above seemed to flicker, as if the sky itself had blinked. The children didn't resist. They tilted their heads back, eyes closed, marks glowing faintly through the thin fabric of their shifts. Tobias spoke then, the first words anyone had heard from him in days. "They will remember you." The surface of the ice bulged upward between them, as though something beneath had pressed its hands, or something like hands, against it. Cracks spidered outward, not breaking the surface but forming symbols that glowed just like the cellar walls. The boy tried to run but found his legs heavy, his body resisting, his ears were ringing, and in that ringing came a rhythm, slow, deliberate, 3 beats. Pause, 3 beats, the same knocking, now inside his skull. Then it stopped, the ice flattened, the faces sank out of sight. Tobias turned, leading the children back toward shore. But the boy noticed something was wrong. There were only 10 children now. 1 was gone. No sound, no splash, no sign at all. Just gone. The next morning, in the snow where they had stood, there was a single bare footprint pressed so deep it reached the dirt beneath. Her name was Eleanor Price. She had been the youngest in the procession, just 7 years old. When the others returned from the frozen river that night, her absence was obvious, but no one dared to say her name aloud. For 3 weeks, her parents left a candle burning in their window, the flame guttering low each night. They did not speak of her in the market, nor did anyone offer comfort. In that town, loss was not to be pitied. It was to be waited for. And then, on the 21st night, she came back. It was just before dawn when her mother woke to the sound of the front door creaking open. Eleanor stood there, barefoot, her white shift dirty and torn, her hair matted with ice. Her skin was pale, not pale from cold, but pale like milk, without a single blush of blood beneath it. Her lips were blue, yet she smiled. Her mother rushed to her, but froze at the first touch. Eleanor's skin was cold, not the kind of cold that warms slowly under your hand. This cold didn't yield. It felt like touching stone. She didn't speak, she didn't blink much, But she followed her mother inside, sat at the table, and folded her hands exactly as she had before every breakfast of her short life. Except this time, she never touched the food. When her father tried to ask where she'd been, she tilted her head slightly, as though listening to a voice he couldn't hear. Then she answered with just 3 words, her voice calm, empty. "The dark remembers." They checked her pulse. There was none. Her chest didn't rise or fall. And yet she moved, and walked, and opened doors. She even slept, though no one could say if her eyes ever fully closed. The worst was the mark. The others had marks faint and fading. Eleanor's was black and raised, pulsing faintly in time with something far slower than a heartbeat. Sometimes if you pressed your ear to her chest, you could hear a sound, like a slow knocking on wood from far away. Within days, Tobias visited their home. He placed his hand over Eleanor's mark, closed his eyes, and smiled. Then he whispered something in her ear. From that night on, Eleanor never went anywhere without standing exactly 3 steps behind him. From the moment she returned, Eleanor was never more than an arm's reach behind Tobias Hale. When he walked through the market, she was there. When he stood in the churchyard staring at the ground where no grave should be, she was there. Even when he vanished into the forest at night, the kind of blackness so thick you could lose your own hand in front of your face, she followed without hesitation. The townsfolk began to notice something strange. The other marked children, those who still played in the snow and spoke in low voices, would stop whatever they were doing the moment Eleanor appeared. They'd watch her with wide eyes, and without a single word, they'd fall into line behind her. It was as though Tobias no longer needed to gather them. Eleanor could do it with a glance. One merchant swore he saw it happen in his shop. 2 of the marked boys had been whispering in the back corner, pockets full of stolen nails and twine. Eleanor stepped through the door, silent, expressionless. The boys froze, put the items back, and walked out behind her like soldiers called to formation. The merchant said it was the closest thing to obedience, without fear, he had ever seen, and it chilled him to the bone. But Eleanor wasn't just leading them, she was changing them. In the weeks that followed, the children began to mimic her stillness. They no longer laughed, they no longer argued. Their eyes began to hold the same pale, unblinking calm, and one by one their pulses slowed, so much so that the town's physician, Dr. Harrow, refused to check them anymore. "If they're breathing," he said, "it's not the way you or I breathe." Tobias seemed pleased. He no longer spoke in the market or the churchyard, but in the abandoned tannery by the river, a place the town avoided since the fire. Some nights, lights glowed behind its shattered windows. Those who lived nearby said the light didn't flicker like fire, but pulsed, in rhythm, with a sound like slow knocking. Eleanor stood at the tannery door each time, hands folded, eyes forward, and every child who entered passed by her first, touching their fingers lightly to the black mark above her heart, as though seeking permission. It was Jacob Fenwick, the cooper's son, who followed them. He'd been warned his whole life never to go near the old tannery. The fire had burned hot enough to melt the rafters into twisted black skeletons, and the air inside was said to carry the memory of the chemicals used there, sharp and bitter. But curiosity and fear have always been twin siblings, and that night, curiosity won. He waited until the last child disappeared inside. Then, keeping low, he crept along the riverbank until he could slip in through the broken foundation. The first thing he noticed was the smell. It wasn't smoke, and it wasn't the acrid tang of tanned hides. It was something faint, metallic, like blood left too long on cold iron. The second thing was the light. It came not from candles or lanterns, but from a ring of symbols carved deep into the tannery's floorboards. They glowed with the same slow, deliberate pulse Jacob had heard in the knocking. In the center of that ring stood Tobias Hale. Eleanor was beside him, her hands clasped. Around them the marked children formed a perfect circle facing inward, eyes fixed on Tobias. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Tobias was building something, not with hammer and nails, but with bones, long bones, short bones, curved like ribs, narrow like finger joints. Some were pale and clean, others dark with age. They were fitted together into an arch that reached higher than Tobias's head. Jacob could not tell if the bones were human or animal, only that they were too uniform, too precise, to be scavenged at random. And then Tobias spoke, his voice deep and steady. "When the arch is complete, the door will open." Eleanor stepped forward, handing him a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, reverently. It was a skull, small, delicate, the size of a child's. Tobias placed it at the keystone position of the arch, the P. Pulse of the floor's symbols quickened. The air grew colder, and somewhere in the shadows above them, Jacob thought he saw movement, like fingers curling down from the darkness. He backed away, heart pounding, but stopped when he realized. The children were now humming, low and deep, in perfect unison. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the broken floorboards, pulsing like a heartbeat, but not a human one. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as the symbols around the bone arch began to glow brighter, flickering in a rhythm both ancient and alive. Tobias placed both hands on the skull at the keystone. The bone warmed beneath his touch, glowing a dull red. The arch itself began to pulse, expanding and contracting as if it were breathing, slow, deep breaths that shook the tannery to its foundations. From the shadows, a sound emerged. Not a voice, not a cry, but a low, resonant thrum, a call from some place beneath the earth. It filled the space between them, pushing against the walls, pressing on Jacob's ribs like a physical force. The children's humming synchronized, growing into a chant. It was neither word nor song, but a vibration that wrapped around the air like smoke. Suddenly the arch exhaled. A ripple ran down the bones, as if the structure flexed with a life of its own. And then, the impossible happened. The space within the arch began to darken, not shadow, but a void so deep it seemed to swallow light itself. It grew thicker, thicker, until it became a black hole suspended in mid-air, a doorway not made of wood or stone, but of absence. Jacob's skin prickled. He felt a tug, a pull, gentle but relentless, urging him closer. The hum became a whisper, whispering a phrase he couldn't understand, yet somehow knew. "Come closer here." His feet moved without his will. His fingers reached out. Before he could decide, the arch inhaled again, and the blackness sucked at him like the breath of a living thing. Jacob stumbled back, heart pounding, eyes wide with terror. The doorway collapsed instantly, the glow faded, the chanting stopped. Tobias turned to the children and spoke softly, "Not yet, but soon." Jacob fled the tannery that night, the echoes of the humming chasing him through the empty streets. The town grew restless. Whispers spread like wildfire, carried on the bitter wind through cracked windows and over frozen fields. The breath beneath the bones, they called it, a phrase that slipped from lip to lip, heavy with dread and disbelief. No one spoke Tobias's name openly anymore. Instead, they spoke in hushed tones about the child without a pulse and the arch of death. Mothers clutched their children closer, locking doors tight before sunset. Men patrolled the streets with lanterns, eyes darting into every shadow. But fear only made the darkness stronger. One night, at the old meeting hall, a group gathered. A ragged assembly of farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers. They had heard the rumors about the tannery, about the bone arch, and about the children who no longer seemed quite human. "We need to act," said Samuel Crane, a gravedigger with a face weathered by cold and sorrow. "If that place is a door, if Tobias is calling something here, we can't wait for it to come to us." Plans were made quietly, torches gathered, tools hidden beneath coats. They would burn the tannery, bury the bones, and end this nightmare. But the children marked by Tobias began to disappear, slipping silently from homes, leaving only faint marks on walls and floors. Some said the children were being taken to the tannery, others whispered that Tobias was collecting them for some dark purpose beyond understanding. And then the knocking began again. Slow, measured. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. It echoed through empty streets, rattling windows, seeping into dreams. The town was caught between fear and denial, knowing that what they feared was real, but powerless to stop it. It was a bitter March evening when the mob gathered. Torches flickered in the biting wind, faces grim and hands clenched tight around pitchforks and crowbars. The tannery stood ahead, a broken skeleton of charred timbers and shattered glass, silent and waiting. Samuel Crane led the charge. "Tonight," he said, voice hard as flint, "we end this. No more children lost. No more bones in the dark." They doused the ruins with oil, lit the kindling, and waited. The flames roared to life, swallowing the remains in a wall of fire that crackled and hissed. But the fire was not hungry enough. It licked at the edges, then faltered, as if the building itself was breathing, resisting. Then came the knocking, louder, sharper, echoing from within the flames. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The fire twisted unnaturally, flames bending away from the center as if repelled. From the heart of the blaze, a figure emerged. Tall, thin, eyes glowing like embers, skin pale as ash. It was Tobias. The crowd froze, terror rooting them in place. He stepped forward, and the fire retreated, leaving the ruins untouched. His voice, cold and commanding, cut through the night. "You cannot burn what lives beneath the bone." Behind him the air shimmered. From the ashes, the bone arch rose again, intact, glowing softly in the firelight. The marked children appeared, surrounding Tobias, faces pale but calm. Eleanor stood closest, her black mark glowing like a heartbeat. Samuel raised his torch, but before he could strike, the flames flared wildly, forming a barrier between them. The knocking echoed, not from the tannery, but all around the town, inside walls, beneath floors, in every shadow. The mob scattered, fleeing into the night, their courage broken by something no one understood. The tannery still stands, unburned, waiting. In the dim light of the town's archives, beneath layers of dust and forgotten ledgers, an ancient secret waited. Samuel Crane's son, desperate to understand the darkness that had taken his father's courage, uncovered a brittle leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and fragile. The book was a ledger of births and deaths stretching back 2 centuries, before the town's founding. Its entries told a story long buried beneath time and silence. Tobias Hale's name appeared multiple times, but not as one person. Instead, the name marked a lineage, a bloodline intertwined with tragedy, mystery, and a curse no one dared speak aloud. Generations before Tobias, a child was born under a black moon, said to carry the pulse of death, a heartbeat that defied nature, and a body that never truly lived. Each generation bore a child like this, marked by a strange sign on their chest and a silence that followed them. The curse was clear. These children would be both the key and the gatekeepers of a dark passage, a door between worlds that had been sealed by forgotten ancestors long ago. One entry, faded almost beyond recognition, hinted at the cost: families torn apart, disappearances, madness, and a final warning scrawled hastily in the margin. The pulse stops, but the shadow never dies. Samuel's son read on, understanding at last that Tobias was not an anomaly, but the latest in a long line of children born to carry a terrible burden. A burden tied to that tannery, the bone arch, and the knocking that haunted their nights. The truth was no longer hidden. The curse was alive, and it was waking. Tobias never spoke of his childhood, but fragments surfaced in moments of silence, flickers of memories that belonged to no one else but him. He remembered cold stone walls, damp and dark, where whispers floated like ghosts. Faces blurred, voices half heard in shadows, a cradle made of twisted branches, rocking endlessly, though no hand moved it. He recalled a woman, not his mother, with eyes like storm clouds, who sang lullabies in a language lost to time. Her hands were pale and cold, but gentle as she traced the mark on his chest, whispering words that tasted like ash. He remembered the first time the knocking came, not from the world outside, but inside his own skin. a rhythm pulsing beneath the surface, relentless and growing louder. In his dreams he saw a door, ancient, carved with symbols that burned into his mind. He reached for the handle, but it always slipped away just beyond his grasp. Sometimes he felt the pull of that door, a tug deep in his bones that made his breath catch and his pulse stop. Yet he never died. Those who glimpsed his eyes said they held something old and terrible, not quite human, not quite gone. His memories were fragments of a past no one else could remember, a past written in bone and shadow. And as the years passed, Tobias understood one truth more clearly than any other. He was both the key and the lock. Before Tobias vanished, he left behind a message. Not written on paper, not spoken aloud, but carved deep into the oldest stone of the town's cemetery, the crypt of the founders. It was discovered years later by a gravedigger, his lantern flickering as he cleared ivy from the weathered surface. The carving was simple, yet chilling. 3 symbols arranged in a triangle, and beneath them, 4 words etched so deeply the stone seemed to bleed shadow. Do not open the door. Beneath the warning, faint scratches looked like a map, twisted lines and marks that no one could decipher, except that they pointed toward the tannery. Locals whispered that the carving was Tobias's final act of defiance, a plea to the living to resist the pull of the arch, the bone door, and whatever lay beyond. Some believed it was a curse, others said it was a prophecy. But all agreed on one thing: Tobias knew something no one else did. Something so dangerous, so dark, that even the child born without a pulse feared what would come if the door was opened. It was a cold autumn night when a group of desperate men returned to the tannery. Ignoring the carved warning in the cemetery, they believed they could control whatever lay behind the bone arch, harness its power, bend it to their will. They brought with them tools of steel and fire, chanting prayers twisted by fear and ambition. The marked children gathered silently, watching as the men approached the glowing arch. One of them, a butcher named Hale, reached out and touched the skull set at the keystone. The moment his fingers grazed the bone, the arch shuddered. A scream tore through the tannery, not from any man, but from the arch itself. The void inside twisted and writhed, stretching out tendrils of darkness like fingers seeking flesh. Hale was the first to vanish. His body dissolved into shadows, leaving behind only a faint echo of his last breath. Panic spread like wildfire. The men fled, but the arch pulsed, pulling at them with invisible chains. One by one they disappeared. Swallowed by the void, their screams swallowed whole. Outside, the knocking grew deafening, a relentless hammering on the walls of the tannery and the mines of the town. Those who remained whispered of curses and bargains, of shadows that watched from every corner, waiting to claim the next soul foolish enough to challenge the bone door. The arch remained, untouched and unyielding, a reminder of the price paid for curiosity and defiance. Fear consumed the town like a slow poison. In whispered desperation, the elders gathered in the old chapel, searching through dusty tomes for a way to break the curse that gripped them all. Their prayers were frantic, but hope was scarce. They found mention of a ritual, ancient and forbidden, said to sever the bond between the living and the shadow beyond the bone door. It required blood, silence, and the sacrifice of something pure. With trembling hands, they chose Eleanor, the child who never breathed, but never died. Some called her a blessing, others a curse incarnate. On a moonless night, cloaked in shadow and fear, the townsfolk led Eleanor to the edge of the frozen river. Around her, the marked children stood motionless, their black marks pulsing faintly. The ritual began. Elders chanted in a tongue long forgotten, drawing symbols in the snow that glowed with cold fire. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, unblinking, distant. As the final words fell from trembling lips, the ice beneath them cracked, not breaking but shifting. The river seemed to breathe deep and slow. Then Eleanor's mark flared bright, and the knocking returned, louder than ever, shaking the frozen earth. The ritual had done something, but not what they hoped. The town was sealed tighter within its shadow, bound to the arch and its unholy pulse. As the town sank deeper into silence and fear, a small group emerged from the shadows, those willing to bargain with the darkness rather than fight it. Led by the town's physician, Dr. Harrow, they formed a secret alliance with Tobias and Eleanor, hoping to unlock the mystery of the bone arch before it consumed them all. The price was steep. In exchange for knowledge, they offered their loyalty and their blood, willingly bearing the marks that tethered them to the arch's power. Dr. Harrow, once a skeptic, became the keeper of Tobias's secrets. He documented strange phenomena, wounds healing without scar, pulses slowing and speeding at impossible rhythms, and whispers in the night that no one else heard. The alliance worked to understand the arch's breath, its knocking, and the shifting shadows beneath the town, believing that mastery could be found in submission. But mastery came at a cost. Those who bore the marks began to change, eyes darkening, hearts slowing, voices softening into the rhythmic tapping that haunted their dreams. They were becoming part of the arch's pulse, no longer fully alive, but not dead either. And the question lingered: how long before the arch would demand the final sacrifice? The night Tobias vanished was colder than any before it. A biting wind howled through the empty streets, rattling shutters and sweeping snow into drifts. The town was wrapped in a heavy silence, the kind that presses on your chest and stills your breath. Tobias was last seen standing by the riverbank near the tannery, his pale face turned upward to the stars. Eleanor stood behind him, silent as always, her mark glowing faintly in the dark. No one knows what passed between them, only that Tobias spoke his final words aloud, clear and steady. "The door will open, but not by my hand." Then he stepped onto the ice. The surface rippled like water beneath his feet, yet he did not sink. He walked toward the center, where the bone arch waited silently, its glow dim but steady. As Tobias reached the arch, the knocking began, slow, deliberate, 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. He placed his hand on the skull keystone. The arch breathed in and out, shadows swirling around him. Then, nothing. No scream, no light, no sign of struggle, just silence. When the townsfolk found the ice the next morning, there were no footprints. The arch stood intact, untouched by frost or snow. Tobias Hale was gone. And with him, the last hope of closing the door. With Tobias gone, the town was left in a limbo between fear and resignation. The bone arch remained, an unyielding presence at the river's frozen heart, a silent witness to secrets no one dared unravel. The marked children continued to carry their shadows, their pulses slower with each passing year. Eleanor, now older yet unchanged, became the keeper of Tobias's legacy. She wandered the town like a ghost, her mark pulsing faintly beneath her clothes, eyes hollow yet aware, a living reminder of the curse that clung to them all. Some townsfolk whispered that Tobias's disappearance was a sacrifice, a final act to hold the darkness at bay. Others feared it was merely the beginning. The knocking still echoed in the deepest hours of the night, a reminder that the door was never truly closed. It called to those who would listen, promising power, secrets, and a price few understood. Generations came and went, but the pulse remained, slow, relentless, a heartbeat beneath the surface of the town's quiet facade. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the bone arch, the truth waited, waiting for the day the door would open again. This is the truth they tried to bury, the secret no one was meant to know. The child born without a pulse was never truly alive, but neither was he dead. Tobias Hale was a bridge, a living key between this world and something darker, older, beyond human understanding. The bone arch was not a door to be opened. It was a seal, a prison holding back forces that would unravel reality itself if unleashed. The knocking you hear in the silence, the slow, steady tapping beneath your skin, is the pulse of that prison, fighting to break free. And it calls to you. It calls to every man who listens. To ignore it is to live in blissful ignorance. To answer is to begin a journey into darkness, a path that changes you forever. You can walk away, you can pretend the story ends here. But know this, Once you hear the pulse, once the door stirs in your blood, there is no turning back. Speak these words twice in the comments if you accept the truth and the journey. The pulse calls me, the door will open. This is your invitation to step beyond the veil, to awaken the part of you hidden in shadow. The choice is yours.